Welcome to the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. I'm your host, Donald Grodoff, along with my wife, Gina. Our goal is to give voice to the hidden mind of Obsessive-Compulsive Disorder, better known as OCD. In this podcast, we are interviewing yet another person dealing with OCD either professionally or personally. So stay with us for this impactful conversation. We would love to have your comments or to have you as a guest, or if you wish to tell your OCD or anxiety story, please visit us at invisiblewheelchair.com. So let's find out more about who we're interviewing today. I'm excited today to introduce to you Michaela and David Culkin. Michaela and David are professional educators who have lived with obsessive-compulsive disorder for over 25 years in their marriage. Michaela has served as an elementary school teacher and principal for over 20 years and earned her doctorate in curriculum and instruction at University of Kansas. David retired from the military and works as an adult educator, earning a doctorate from Kansas State University. They continue to survive OCD every day. And today we're going to interview them and also talk about their book, OCD and Marriage. Now, before we get to that interview, let's hear a word about our sponsor.
Today I'm here to talk about Q Science's sleep spray. Q Sciences has a number of different sprays. There's a melatonin sleep spray that contains melatonin, 5-HTP, and L-theanine. We've used other melatonin products to help our children with falling asleep. Melatonin is something that occurs naturally in our body that helps us quiet and calm down for sleep. And yet I really feel like I've seen a difference in the spray versus other products. Our youngest is here to talk about it. What things did you like better about the spray versus the other things?
I don't like the chew tablets because they leave like a weird taste, and they're mainly like they also have like you get bits in your teeth.
Okay, so Q Science's spray.
It's a lot better, I'd say. The taste is pretty decent and it works well.
Okay. I'm happy with the quality of these products and how they're helping our whole family. If you'd like to learn more,
simply go to qsciences.focusedhealthyfamily.com. That's the letter Q, sciences.focusedhealthyfamily.com, or visit invisiblewheelchair.com and find out more information there.
there are a lot of supplement products out there, yet you want one that's of good quality. Check out Q Sciences for your family.
And now, let's get to that interview. So David, Michaela, welcome. And David, welcome back, to the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. It's so good to see both of you here. And I'm anxious about this and excited about it because, I haven't had many couples on here talking about somebody in the couple having OCD. So this is going to be, I think, kind of a fun conversation, but also a very good informative one. So welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So I don't know who wants to take the lead on this, but kind of telling the story, or maybe one says one word and they go back and forth. No,
we'll do our best.
Yeah. Let's talk about the story first. Like tell us about how OCD came about for you and how you get, you tell it how you want to tell it. Let's go it that way.
Well, thank you for having us on and allowing us to tell our story. And I would say I would start chronologically. In other words, I'm the one with OCD in the relationship, but it started for me much longer or before we met. And that was even when I was in third grade, I knew that there were some things that were perhaps different that I was struggling with. But I didn't know what it was, nor did I have a name for it. So little things like checking everything, questioning almost everything, and especially at the time of my parents' divorce, that just became even more apparent. And then when we moved after my parents divorced, and by third grade, getting a big homework assignment in a new school. I just remember having a breakdown one day, just realizing it wasn't about my skill to accomplish the task. It was more of my ability to do it perfectly and to understand it with control. Throughout my years growing up, then living with my mother, she would point out too, and looking back, I appreciate that in terms of how I would be have a need for control in various aspects of my life. No, not one pattern. So by the time that I went to college and went out in the world, I started in the Army as an Army officer. I realized that structure suited me well. And that was probably hiding the symptoms that I was dealing with, but that I would also have continuous or a recurrence of what I called obtrusive or uncommanded thoughts about anything that was taboo in society. So if it was, let's say, a documentary that I was watching on serial killers, I would worry that, oh, well, I could be this, I could do these things physically, I could do these things. And because I'm thinking about them, does that mean that I want to do them? And so forth. And yet I would have no one to bounce this off of in terms of, am I going off the reservation? Am I on azimuth, or am I grounded? And so by the time I met Michaela over 25 years ago, many of my symptoms were hidden, not only from other people, but from myself. And again, didn't have any diagnosis. It was only until about the first or second year of our marriage, I would say, and Kayla can correct me, that we really found out that, hey, maybe, there's something here. And that's when we met to actually, she was closing up her dealings with a psychologist for an unrelated issue. And he was talking to me, and just at the end of the session, he handed me a brochure on Prozac and how it addressed OCD. So I thought that was a strong hint. So the years go by, and my military career continues. I did, I think, okay for my skills, and the fact that I'm a checker and that I like to check things means that I didn't have much problem on hand receipts for property I signed for, checklists in aviation in which I worked. All those things really catered, in fact, to my OCD traits and symptoms, and yet fed well into that cultural narrative we all have that, oh, I have OCD too. I like to make sure everything's in the right place too. And rather diminish my story. But I didn't really think of that because I didn't think, again, that I had OCD until we were diagnosed about 15, 20 years ago.
And I would say when I first met Dave, I thought, well, he's quirky. we were really good friends first, best friends. And then we started to date. And I always felt that Dave was quirky and a little rigid, just certain things. But when you kind of find that match, that partner, that quirkiness, it's okay. It's just his personality, what makes him him. But as we fell in love and got married, we realized there was just something wasn't quite right, and we hadn't even thought about OCD. And we did go to marriage counseling. I mean, we were trying everything we could to make it work, because we're not quitters. We weren't going to quit on each other. And I remember about year 7, we finally, I would say, saw the right person who was able to say, I think you have OCD, Dave. And I just remember just a sigh of relief that you could at least put a name on it. And then start the therapy and working together, because nobody could really figure out what was going on with us. We weren't ugly to each other. We normal marriage problems, I'd say, or challenges. I mean, we all have those, but OCD, we finally were able to say that's what it is, and here's what we can do for it.
So you It's interesting. I found you said that when you found out it was a relief. Well, was there other emotions or other thoughts that went on at the same? I'll ask Michaela first, and Dave, I'll ask you next. So, were there other feelings or other thoughts around it that were a little scary, I guess?
Absolutely, because you think about OCD and in society what people define as OCD, and until you really read about it and find out about it, it's not just, there's not just one definition for it. So it was absolutely overwhelming. But I had the relief in knowing that we were both willing to work on it. I do remember just true transparency, sitting there in the therapist's office, nurse psychologist's office, just saying he's broken, and I didn't mean that in an ugly way, absolutely not. But I just thought, oh, like you put marriages on a pedestal and you think every marriage is just perfect, and we all have our challenges. But I just remember saying out loud, he's broken, without even thinking about what I was trying to really say. But I'd say we've done, it's been a long road, but I think relief is the biggest thing I felt when I found out. But then I thought, oh heck, we have a lot of work ahead of us.
Yeah. Dave, what about you? What was, I would have, now I'm going to say, I would imagine that you might have been concerned that it was going to affect the marriage in a really negative way. I don't want to, I guess I'm putting words in your mouth and I shouldn't do that. So you tell me, what was the feelings when you found out for sure that that's what it was?
I think it was relief, and also, but for a different reason from Kayla. It was what she said, but also was finally I had a name for the silent partner that I've been carrying around with me since childhood. Finally, I had a name that I could put on those uncommanded thoughts, those compulsions, those obsessive thoughts, and mostly purely obsessive thoughts that I had that I didn't want and I couldn't get out of my head. So it was almost, in a sense, relief, like you would if you were released from a cage or prison, in the sense. And so one of my first reactions was to go out and learn about it. So I found, at that time, it was like, what, 96, 95. And I went to the library. The local library had a book on by Penzel on what OCD was. And that helped me, because me being a bookish person and being, I just want to absorb as much knowledge as I could about this. And it wasn't until I was looking actually at a website, the online world was young in that age, in that time, but still just reading posts by other people and realizing I wasn't the only one dealing with this. And now I have a name to it. That was like a trifecta. It was kind of like, okay, now I know, at least I have some tools that I can pave the way forward.
I have to say, I have to compliment you guys and give you really kudos, because I would, I know how tough it is when it's somebody else, when it's my kids versus my partner. And it was tough enough on us as it was with that, but to have it within the couple itself, and you guys have really, you didn't let it knock you down. You really turned around and made it and worked on it. And that just, I find that fascinating. And I think it's great that you guys are doing that.
Well, if you don't mind me just adding that it has been challenging and it's not easy work. I remember when Dave was first diagnosed, we knew what we had, we knew, the third person in our marriage, but it took a while for Dave to trust me when I said, you're doing it. It took a while for him to truly trust, because at first I think he thought I was using it as an excuse to get him to stop perseverating on whatever he was talking about. But it took him a while to realize, oh gosh, I am doing it. And so it's a lot of work. And I don't want anyone who's listening to this to think that, oh, we found out we were diagnosed and everything was perfect. It took us, I would say, a couple of years to kind of find that battle rhythm, to truly trust that, when he was doing it, he was doing it, and then to stop. It's one thing to be aware you're doing it, but then to stop mid-cycle, it's hard.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
sorry, I wanted to add that.
yeah, no, I'm very familiar with that. It's hard to stop, and like you said, awareness is a big factor of it. I know let's talk about your book, because you've written a book to help others, and I think it's wonderful. It's called OCD and Marriage: Pathways to Reshaping Your Lives Together. Well, tell me. I guess what was your purpose for writing it? I guess let's start with that.
I think our ultimate goal was to help other people who are in similar situations. When we were first diagnosed, and I keep saying we because it's part of our marriage, it's part of us. Yeah. We are readers, we're researchers, and we couldn't find anything that was about couples. And married couples and how to build that life together with OCD in it. And so we decided to write a book to try to help other people, because of course that was, before I make us sound really old, but I mean, searching online for things wasn't as easy. Going to the library, we tried support groups, and they were great for Dave, but I couldn't find that support of somebody who was in my position as a caregiver, as a spouse. So I think that's why it was so important for us to write this book.
And, I think Dave, I think I asked you this before when we were talking, when we did the first interview, but are you able to find positives out of the OCD for your marriage in any way? I know that's a strange question, but is there anything that you can find that was good about it? Or, you wrote a book and, published a book. So that I don't know, that's a kind of a strange question, but
I think it's a great question, Dave.
Yeah, no, I think it's important because as I've learned more about it and reflected on it, I realized it's really, in a way, it's part of our marriage in the sense that it's another challenge. It's not something to be put on a pedestal in awe, nor is it something to be ignored. And like any marriage and any worthwhile relationship, it's going to be work, like Kayla was saying, because it's worth it. Every marriage has its challenge. Every relationship has its challenges. And part of that means that it's a lot of work to focus on your communication, to focus on trusting each other and developing that level of trust that you can be not only committed to each other through thick and thin, but also to especially when you're really at your lowest. And so this, in a sense, is no different. If you're being diagnosed with OCD in a marriage, I found it's not a different thing. It's just another part of your marriage that you have to deal with. And your choice to ignore it or to deal with it is critical as a couple, because it can mean the difference between ending in divorce or ending in more commitment, a deeper relationship, and an enhanced sense of trust that I think is our result because we made that choice early on. So in a sense, it's not something separate from our marriage, and it's forced us to make that decision to own it. In a sense, we're not victims here. We realize we have a challenge, and every couple, every relationship does have a challenge, and you can make your choice to be a victim or to really work at it together. And in so doing, you become better people.
And I'd say it's a positive in that it's really helped our communication. and even I say secret communication in that, like, we'll be in a public place and I can tell that Dave is having a hard time. When we go to areas where there are large crowds now, pre-pandemic, of course, but and just some of the silent communication of just squeezes on the hand, or just a certain touch, or certain, I'm here for you, we can do this together. And I'd say we've used a lot of humor. In our book, we talk about Herb. He's what we've called the OCD. And even when Dave goes on trips, I'll say, okay, you got to leave Herb there. You got to, he's staying there. But I'd say our communication has really benefited from knowing about this OCD, because we have to communicate with each other all the time, so we know what each other's thinking.
So what I guess I'm kind of hearing out of it, kind of forces you to do better, or to make efforts towards things, like you say, with communication. Just one other thought with it: when you go out into, do you set expectations for each beforehand? Do you talk about, like, when you're going to go somewhere? Hey, if this is going to happen, I'm going to twitch my ear, or something like. Do you set some expectations going out?
I'd say we do. The first thing we do is Dave time. Everything's on Dave time, because Dave doesn't like change, and so flexibility is difficult. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
And so I'll let Dave know, okay, we need to leave at this time, but I offer a little buffer in there so that if he's checking something, or having a hard time, we have some buffer in there. And Dave, I think, inherently knows that buffer time is there, but it still helps. But when we do go to large gatherings, football games, basketball games, where there are a lot of people, Dave, I'll remind him, okay, do you have your earplugs? Because Dave gets just very overwhelmed by everything. And so if he needs to do something to accommodate how he's feeling in that moment, I've kind of just learned to, I'd say, play interference a little bit, because people don't understand if all of a sudden you're putting earplugs in a, a social situation, people might think, well, that's just really weird, but it's helping Dave out. So I'll kind of play, do some static, so Dave can just kind of privately take care of what, the earplugs, or if he needs to even walk away. I don't make a big deal about it. I'm just like, oh, I'm sure he's gone off to the bathroom or something like that. So I think that's that silent communication piece, but we know that those things might happen, if that makes sense.
And just to add to that, I totally agree with that. And also, we wouldn't be able to do those things, though, if we hadn't decided right up front that we wanted to combat this and do it together. And that led to my ability to trust her, that, when she says, hey, you're doing it, or it's time to go, or whatever, that I can take her word for it and do the right thing. And that trust, that communication has led to that trust. So it's that it supports each other. And
I'd say too, when I know Dave needs reassurance when we're out in public, we have, certain squeezes, like I'll squeeze his hand a certain way. Or when we first were trying to figure out our new normal in social situations, we had certain code words that we had decided on ahead of time. And half the fun was working the code word into a sentence. But the minute you heard that word, whether it was me, because I knew Dave was starting to cycle, or Dave, because he knew that he needed to get out of there, we had decided on the word together. And the minute you heard it, we just, you knew, okay, wrap it up and it's time to go. Yeah. So.
Yeah, my wife and I did that too. Not about OCD, but anxiety. And our word was eggshells. So she would, all she'd have to do is say, I'm feeling eggshells right now. And I knew right then that we did a thing called mirroring, or dialoguing that we learned from counseling. And that triggered me to go, okay, she wants to do this dialogue process, this mirroring process with me, or I could do it for her. So so I understand that a lot. I wanted to talk about the in your book, you have the 6 pathways. I take it that was kind of the steps to what you do to work through the OCD. Is that correct? Yes.
We actually built on the model that Melissa Orloff used in her book on the ADHD effect in marriage, and that was wildly successful for her in that community. There are different requirements and needs in OCD, so I modified it with her permission to reflect those unique requirements. And one of the things is that we call them pathways instead of steps because they're not necessarily sequential. You don't go one and then you have to complete one to two and so forth. You can enter it in any place, and really it's about entering where a pathway that you feel most comfortable with based on where you are as a couple, where you are as an individual, and then use that to inform yourself about where you need to go. And so it may be from step 3 to step 5 or to step 6 to step 2. It doesn't really matter as long as you're doing something at the end of the day. And so this is about providing some of that structure, though, for couples that don't know what the way forward looks like, and to provide them some things to think about. So in each of those pathways, we describe what that pathway is, but also what does the literature say about this? So for example, communication, the scientific literature, that empirical side talks about the importance of communication and how it does lead to a building up of trust in a relationship. And then we provide examples of how that's worked for us, or even in some cases, how it hasn't worked and what we've done to improve it. And then we follow up with some interactive exercises to provide an opportunity, a space, a safe space for, again, the reader of the book to explore what this may mean for them. So if I capture that.
In it, you one of them you'd say is find your voice, or find your voices. I think it's plural. I think I know what that's referring to, but tell me a little bit about that. What is it? What does that mean?
I think at the end of the day, finding your voice means self-agency. That, like I mentioned before, you have to decide if you're going to be a victim or if you're going to take control of your challenge in your relationship. And this is really nothing more than another challenge to face. And if you do take that step to own it, then one of our purposes is to provide you some tools, or where to find some of the tools that you can be successful with. And so that's what finding your voice is, really just that self-agency to get the tools, tell your story. And at the same time, we're illustrating that by writing this book. The act of writing this book and telling our story not only is healing us, but is also helping others. And that's part of the message. Finding your voice means that you can tell your story to help not only yourself heal, but also help others who may be going through something similar.
Well, and I wrote down the word advocate. It kind of sounds like it's a little bit of advocation for yourself too. Yep. Standing up for, and what you talked about in the stadium of you standing up for him and being willing to be the voice for him to make it safer for him, I guess.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah. And that's another thing, is that advocacy. It's really important. What we found is it's easy to advocate for people who are suffering from OCD, but what we found is there's a lack of advocacy for the caregiver. Mm-hmm. Where do the caregivers go to find support structures that can help them help their loved ones?
Yeah.
So.
Well, and then you talk about getting treatment for both. And what I was going to ask there is, did you individually get treated, like each went to your own therapist, and then did you do couple therapy? And then which was like if you were to recommend to a couple that are going through this, do they need to do separate and together, or which one was more effective?
I think that's a great question. First of all, I think it's important to take that step to talk with somebody, to get that outside help. I really don't think we would be talking to you today had we not sought help and treatment. Because you really, I mean, I'm sure there are people out there who've done it on their own, but it's hard to do it on your own. I think it's important to have that mix, to have that time where you are one-on-one with your therapist. I know it helped both of us to have the single time with our therapist, who then would hear kind of both, I say sides, but both stories. And then when we did meet together as a couple, she knew how both of us were feeling about things, and then could help us work through some of the communications and the challenges that we were having. So I don't know that one is necessarily more important than the other, as much as I think it's important, if you can and you have the means and the time to do it separately and then have couples therapy. I think that really helped us out.
I really agree. I think two things come to mind is the meeting separately with your therapist helps in the element of voice, like you were talking about, to have your story heard, and perhaps even outside of the marriage, so that you feel heard. That's really important. The second part is accountability, which is when you meet together with your therapist, that helps too, because now it's not just you have to justify yourself, not only with your loved one, but also with the therapist. And sometimes it's hard to realize that maybe you're at fault and maybe you have some things to work on, and that's okay.
And I think for me, it allowed me, when I met one-on-one with our therapist, I could be raw, and I could cry, and I could be mad, and I could have my feelings that I knew might hurt Dave's feelings if we were together in the same session. So it allowed me to be raw, and then I'd say be a little bit more rational when we were all meeting together, kind of like what Dave was saying. And sometimes, I mean, I needed, the fault might lay on me. I might not have handled it right, because sometimes it's, as a caregiver, sometimes you just accommodate because you just don't want to deal with it.
Yeah, you're tired.
And that's not always the right answer either.
Yeah, well, it's 11 o'clock at night. You've had a long day. It's hard. I mean, that falls the same with when you have kids. I mean, they hit you. One of the first times with my daughter that it went off the chart was at like 11 o'clock at night. And I was like, "Are you kidding me?" And I can't, And so we did some accommodations. We've even learned that now, that there are times when you have to still be in the accommodation, just to get it past this certain point or something. But
and I'm sorry, I will add real quick, because it's just, I think, kind of fun. Dave, when we were first married, before we realized about the OCD, would brief me every day on every little thing that happened throughout his day. And sometimes these briefings would last up to an hour. And that just, I knew that wasn't a typical part of a marriage. But so then what Dave started to do, once we found out about the OCD, he would write me an email, and he would put every little thing in that email. But the funny thing is, he wouldn't know if I read it or not. He would just send it to me. And then I learned that I could just kind of gloss through it. Not that it wasn't important, but I didn't need to know that he had spinach with his salad at lunch, those kinds of things. So he would never really know if I did read them. I promise. I did look at them. I know you're just
most of them anyway, most of them.
but now he has a brief list at the end of the day that's maybe 2 bullet points, 2 things to talk about. And we have it. I mean, it's done in like 5 minutes. So I just wanted to add that.
No, I read that in the book, and I was like, oh my, well, there's this thing, my wife and I, women have like so many thousand more words than men do, and so my wife is one, she's a late night person. I'm an early morning person, so late night, I'm ready to just, I want to read a book and kind of go, and so we've gotten to this point of I'll look at it and go, how many more thousand do we have to go?
Yes.
And she'll luckily now she laughs at that comment. At first she did not, but that
Yeah.
So anyway, well, let me ask you this. Why I'm going to say, I ask you what advice would you give to a couple, having known what you do now? And I know the first bit of advice is go get your book, which I think I agree with very wholeheartedly. And I'll have your book up there when we get this up there. But is there other things you would advise? I mean, a lot of it has come out in what we've talked about, but is there anything else that you would say to a couple that are just first learning this thing?
It's hard work, and it's going to be hard work, and it's still hard work, but it's worth it. Don't give up. As a caregiver, it's hard. And I know it's hard with the person who has the OCD, but don't give up, because the hard work is worth it in the end.
Yeah. And I would say it's nothing so monumental that can't be overcome. It's not, you may have to deal with it the rest of your life, but we all have challenges that we'll have to deal with the rest of our lives. And so it's a choice. It comes down to, I think, a choice between, are you going to play the victim, or are you going to really remain committed to the relationship to solve this challenge, to address it head on, and in the process, build your love and commitment and your relationship so that it's more rewarding.
Day by day, things take time.
Yep.
Day by day.
Yeah, we know the day by day. We've been doing it for 12 years, day by day with our kids. So
Yes.
I fully understand that. So, well, the book, again, I'll remind my listeners, is OCD and Marriage, Pathways to Reshaping Your Lives Together. Is there any other like websites or anything else that, do you have a website that you'd like to put out there, or some way they can find out more about you guys, other besides reading the book, which again, I'll remind you, read the book. Anyway, that's a shameless plug there for you. So
Thank you.
No, we do have a website, ocdandmarriage.com. And it also has a link to, if you desire to purchase the book, but it also has more information on us and where you can find more resources. So that's the big recommendation, I'd say.
Well, cool. Well, I think we could probably talk on this for hours. I would imagine, because your book has so much good stuff in it. And like I said, I've plowed through some of it, but there's still a lot more to go. And I'll eventually get to it. But it has been wonderful to talk to you. You guys are great. And I really appreciate it. I think this is going to be an inspiration for other couples that may not realize that they're in this, that now they may find out and be able to get some help on this. So that this is really wonderful. Thank you so much for being part of this.
Thanks for having us today.
Thank you very much.
This concludes this podcast. We hope you will subscribe if you haven't already. Remember, we would love your comments, or if you have a story to tell, we want to put it up on the podcast. Simply go to invisiblewheelchair.com to do that. Don't forget to like us on Facebook at Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest, we love guests. So simply go to invisiblewheelchair.com and contact us from there. Gina and I are here to help you or your family get to a better place naturally. Simply visit focusedhealthyfamily.com for more information. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Keep tapping and focusing forward for a better way.